Welcome everyone to the African Doctoral Academy Masterclass webinar. My name is Natalie Kavalik. I'm the Program Manager at the African Doctoral Academy, and I'm joined by my colleague Luther Chippenbira and our guest speaker, Professor Susan van Skalkwijk, who will be presenting on the topic Having Something Worth Saying, Publication Before, During, and After the PhD. Professor van Skalkwijk is Emeritus Professor in Health Professions Education and former Executive Head of the Department of Health Professions Education in the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences at Stellenbosch University. She is a B-rated researcher with the National Research Foundation in South Africa and is an Amy Life Fellow. Her main research interests lie with postgraduate education, curriculum renewal, and academic writing. She has published extensively with over 100 peer review outputs and achieved numerous awards for her services in education and her achievements. We'll be opening the floor to questions after the presentations, so please feel free to ask your questions in the chat or Q&A section, or you can raise your hand and my colleague Luther will be assisting. Just a reminder to everybody that is joining, the session will be recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. So I would like to say a very warm welcome to everybody, and I will now hand over the platform to Professor Susan van Skalkwijk. Welcome, Susan. Thanks, Prof. Prof, we can see your slides perfectly. You would just need to unmute yourself at this moment.
There we go. We'll start again. I thought I was so organized, and then I forget the most important.
It happens. But welcome and thank you very much. There we go. We can see everything is up and running.
Great. So good afternoon, everyone. The numbers were coming through thick and fast, so I sort of lost it around about 100, I think, but fabulous to have so many people with us in this masterclass, this webinar this afternoon. And yes, I said to Natalie and Luther before we started, I'd really like to hear from you as we're going along. So please use the chat, and I will be asking Luther at different points to just tell me what's happening in the chats. We just get a flavor of where everyone is at the moment. Yes, as Natalie said, I've been around for a long time. So I retired officially at the end of 2024. But for those of you looking forward to retirement, let me assure you, academics never retire. We just slow down a little bit, and we have the privilege of being able to just take on board things that really interest us and really play the things that we think we can make a contribution towards. So that's why I'm fortunate enough to be able to be joining you today. And I really hope that over the next hour and a half, we're going to walk a bit of a journey together and really think about what it is that we're doing, what our research is all about, what it looks like, what it means, why it's important, and is it giving us something that's really worth saying? Because publication at the end of the day is about having something worth saying. So we're going to explore that. I'm working on the assumption that many of you are doctoral students, doctoral candidates, or perhaps even recent PhD graduates. And really that will be my point of departure in most instances. But if there are people in the room for whom the PhD is still something a little distant, or perhaps a PhD is something that is way behind, but somehow the publication, shall we call it publication game, is still not quite where we want it to be, then I hope that there will also be some ideas and thoughts that you can take with you from today. So let me start off by making a statement, a bit of a point of departure. And that is that writing is, and I suppose I should add the word in brackets, currently the currency with which academia trades. And of course, writing has been that currency for a long, long time. It has a long history in the academic space. And the reason I said maybe I need to add currency, currently in brackets is, of course, because that landscape of writing is changing significantly as a result of Gen AI and large language models and everything that goes with all of that. And we will touch on that in our hour together. But for now, and I suspect for the next good couple of years, writing will remain the currency with which academia trades. It is also fundamental to the doctoral journey. Myself and Cecilia Jacobs wrote a chapter a couple of years ago where we really looked at this issue of writing as being fundamental to the doctoral journey. And it's the way through which doctoral students, people like yourselves, many of you in the room, demonstrate the extent to which the work that you have undertaken has merit. Okay, so it's in your writing that decisions will be made about the merit, the quality, the relevance, the validity, the usefulness, and I could carry on, of the work that you've done. And the way in which you then declare that currency, the way in which you put it out there for people to look at, for people to make a decision about its merit, about its relevance, is, of course, through peer review. Even doctoral examination is, in essence, peer review, because your examiners will be your peers. There's nothing higher than the PhD in terms of academic programs. Sure, there's some anomalies, but essentially, it will be a fellow PhD who will be reviewing your work ultimately. So the way in which you declare your currency will be through peer review and, of course, through publication. Now, we need to think about why this is important then to us as individuals, whether you're undertaking a PhD or not. So think a little bit as I carry on for a few moments, and maybe you even want to already drop some ideas in the chat. Some of your thoughts and your thoughts on writing and your experiences of getting published. I mean, what is today, maybe today, this session, what is it all about for you? Why did you sign up? What were you hoping to get? What are some of the challenges maybe, or some of the joyous experiences? And why are you thinking about that, and perhaps putting a few things in the chat that maybe Luther can share one or two in a moment or so. I put on the screen my very first official academic publication. You can see there that it was published in 2002. And why that might seem like a very, very long time ago for some people in the room, those of you who are quick at maths will realize that it's a mere 26 years ago, 24 years ago. So it's not that long ago, and yet I'm already retired. So there's a story about that, which I will not bore you with today, except to tell you that I joined academia quite late in life. At the time of getting this paper published, I was actually still busy with my master's. The reason I share it with you is, first of all, to show you that there's a bit of a journey in the way in which we publish and the decisions we make about our publication. And you will see that the title of my paper way back then, and this was, of course, only 8 years after the dawning of the new South Africa, was dealing with the dilemma facing higher education, my field, in South Africa. And I'm emphasizing that in South Africa, and I'll come back to it, against the backdrop of economic globalization. And really what I would argue in that paper was the way in which economic globalization was going to influence, was already influencing and would influence, continue influencing higher education in South Africa in the coming years. At the time, I was working at the Cape Technikon, and as I said, busy with my masters. Already in that title are the seeds of the work that I've done over the past 25 years. Challenging issues facing higher education in South Africa. Halfway through my career, I moved into the health professions. So most of my work has been done in that area, but it's still been, for me, about asking questions about the status quo and challenging others to think about that as well. The other reason I put this on is to remind you, those of you who are anxious about where you are with your publication, anxious about where you are with your PhD studies, anxious about what and how you're going to get published from your PhD studies. I put this up there to show you that it's a long journey that we enter into when we enter into the academic space. And publication is not something that occurs and happens overnight. So over the 24 years, I've now published in excess of 100 papers, but it started with this one, and this one came from postgraduate studies. As I said, most of you are busy with your PhDs now. Mine came from my master's. But it's important that you think about the seeds that you are planting as you think about how you're going to get published from your PhD. So I don't know, Luther, if there's maybe one or two interesting comments in the chat so far.
Okay,
Anyone being brave enough?
we did receive a couple actually. For example, we've got this one that says, I hope to get a critical reader to read my articles and also assistance on how to identify accredited journals for my publications.
Okay, great. We're going to talk about looking at journals. And yes, finding people who are prepared to read your work. We'll talk about that as well. Maybe
Okay.
another one or two, Luther?
Okay, seeing as you spoke about your own masters, we've got someone here who said, I want to receive ideas on how to publish for my master's research and continue growing my publication record.
Great. Well, I hope we're already on the way there. Maybe one more.
Okay, another one. I wanted to get started on the process of publishing to further my academic career. I would like to be a career academic.
Oh, there we go. All right. Well, that's a good point from which to move on, because of course, what today is about for many of you is building your academic careers. On the one hand, it's the sort of at a very practical level, I need to publish from my PhD, or I've started my PhD. Can I really publish now already? And those sorts of things. But then behind all of this is, of course, this speaks to our careers. This speaks to our academic standing. Remember, writing is the currency with which academia trades. When you are up for promotion, people are going to want to know, what have you put out there? How have you contributed to the body of knowledge? And those words, colleagues, are really, really important when we start thinking about our publications. So often we think that we've done research and now we're going to write about this research. But it's not quite that straightforward. You really have to think about, what does your research mean for the field? Why should other people even be bothered about your research? So you have to start thinking about yourself as a bit of a marketer. What are the benefits? What do you offer the field that it doesn't already have? How can you shift people's thinking? And remember, we're not talking Nobel Prize for Physics here. Very often it's small incremental steps. It's the way in which you position it and the way in which you situate your work that highlights just a couple of new ideas that builds into what is already out there. Before we get to the publishing specifically, while we're talking about doctoral writing though, I do want to just draw your attention to the fact, and this speaks to the second comment that we had, or I think it was the first, the person who said they would really like to get a critical reader. Doctoral writing should be thought about as a social practice. I'm going to explain that in a few moments in a little more detail. But for those of you who are feeling lonely, you can take courage from this, because there is a social dimension, an interactive dimension in doctoral writing that really can stand you in good stead. But of course, many of us will say that sounding doctorate, sounding academic is not easy. So we need to think about how do we get into a space where this can become easier? So Teresa Lillis, and this is quite an old quote, but it's just still so true, wrote that in broad terms, this idea of doctoral writing being a social act is that what it entails that students' academic writing, like all other writing, is this social act. It is this because student writing takes place within a whole lot of contexts, within an institution, whichever institution you're representing here this afternoon. That institution has a particular history, a particular culture, a particular set of values, and a particular set of practices, a particular set of ways of doing. And then we haven't even engaged with the fact that, of course, your different disciplines each have a particular history, a particular culture, particular ways of doing, practices, things that they value. You just need to look at a paper that is published in chemistry, for example, and then take a look at a paper that is published in theology or philosophy, and it becomes immediately evident that there's the practical act of writing, but then there's all this other stuff that sits beneath it. Now, one of the most important things that you need to come to grips with if you are to be successful with your academic publishing is to know and understand those practices, those values, understand the culture of your field, understand its history. Where has it come from? So this often means that you have to shift away from just thinking about, can I write properly? Do I have good writing skills? And these as being something that the individual possesses, towards the notion of an individual engaged in a socially situated action, engaging with what people have said before. In my language, and I've run a lot of article writing workshops and similar sorts of engagements, we often use the metaphor of joining a dinner party or joining a conversation. Because when you write, you are joining a conversation that is already ongoing. It's already out there. And there are already people in that room having that dinner party, having that conversation. So how do you prepare for an important event like a dinner party? I wish I could hear from a whole lot of you right now, but maybe one or two of you want to pop into the chat. How do you go about preparing for something really important? Even like participating in an important sports event. Maybe someone in the room ran 2 oceans recently, or took part in the Cape Town cycle tour, one of those things. What do you do? What do you usually draw on? What helps you to navigate preparing for an event like that? I don't know, Luther, has anyone got any ideas?
Right now we don't. Right now we don't.
Oh,
Okay, they're starting to pop in, I think.
sounds good.
We've got one who says, understand what must be done to achieve what is needed.
Yes, yes. That sounds like someone who's serious about their dinner parties.
Okay, and then we have another one to understand the nature of the event.
Yes, yes, critical. I mean, is it going to be like my photograph, a very fancy formal affair with glassware and lots of cutlery? Or is
Yeah.
it just going to be an informal affair? Yes, what else?
Okay, and more rolling in. We've got someone who says budget, menu, guests, who will clean the dishes, dietary preferences. And another one who's like practices, know what is expected.
Yes, yes,
And we've got
absolutely.
Terry Royashi who says mentally prepare.
Yes. Well, already, I mean, all of those have got ticks next to them because you cannot enter the publication space if you are not prepared, if you don't know what the event looks like, if you don't know what to expect. So we will be thinking together a little bit about how we get on board with all of those things. And I like the one about the budget and the washing the dishes. Yes. And there often are dishes after publication. There's often stuff left over that one has to deal with. So I really like those two. And of course, budget is a big thing. And we'll get back to that. But the first most important way of starting is to make sure you know which conversation you're joining. And you think critically about how much you know about it. And here we come to the PhD again, and we think about publication before, during, or after. So some of you in the room, I'm assuming, are probably doing the PhD by publication, which sort of sets a bit of a schedule for you in terms of how you're going to embark on this publication road. But sometimes publishing before your PhD, maybe as you've done a lot of exploratory work, a lot of preliminary work towards your doctoral studies, that might be an area for you to get going and embark on. But that is also a very difficult place very often to start because how much do you know about the conversation you are joining? Now, I can't answer those questions for you. You will know. Does your PhD follow in the same space, academic space, as your master's? So very often people, for example, in the natural sciences, will sort of grow from their master's research into their doctoral research. So they can be very au fait with the conversations that dominate that field. Who are the leaders in that field, and so on and so forth. But that's not true for many others, where sometimes we will have done a master's many years ago and now decided to embark on a PhD. Or we might have completed our PhDs many years ago and are now involved in an area of research that is quite different to the area in which we got the PhD in the first place. The key is that in order for you to have something worth saying, in order for you to pique the interest of the academic journal editor, you will need to know enough about the conversation that you are joining to make sense. And that is not as easy as it sounds. It means you have to read. It means you have to read ongoing. You cannot rely on what you read last year or the year before. You need to show that your work is retaining its currency and is up to date. So the first sort of takeaway message for today is successful publishers or successful academics in terms of academic publishing are those who know very clearly which conversation they are joining. They have a very clear focus. Maybe just as an aside, any of you Maybe some of you have already applied for NRF rating, or you have NRF ratings. Maybe others are aspirant in that regard. The one thing that is every year comes back from NRF feedback is people need to have a clear focus. And that is akin to the conversation that you're joining. So moving on from knowing the field, let's talk a little bit about publishing itself and some of the trends in academic publishing. And I think it's really important for me to say to you that the aim of academic publishing is not to help you get your promotion. That's your aim for submitting something for consideration. But for the journals, they don't typically won't even know who you are, and they are not interested in your aims, goals, and objectives. That sounds terrible, but it's the truth. The aim of academic publishing is to disseminate research and scholarship. That's what they're looking for, research and scholarship. I might also add that in many instances, many of the publishing houses, well, not many, all of the publishing houses are, of course, businesses. And so there's a profit incentive. So they also want to make money. And when we start talking about research, then the way the publishing houses make money is if people are interested in reading what is published. So there's a lot behind why your paper will get published that's got less to do with you as a person. In fact, very little to do with you as a person. It has to do with the extent to which you can offer the field something that the publishers and the editors and the editorial team believes others will want to read. And I'm going to be coming back to that. So I just put a couple of things here just to make you aware. This will probably be familiar to most people, but some considerations globally at the moment, some of the current trends are, of course, increasing push to open access, huge push to open access. This has significant financial implications for many of you, especially if you're going to have to find the funds to be able to pay for your work to be published. So it's a bit of almost a disincentive there. It's not, this aspect of publishing is something that worries me very much. I'm not saying it's right that we can be charged so much to get our work published. That's perhaps a conversation for another day, but you do need to be mindful of that. We're seeing more and more authors participating on papers, although this is very much influenced by the discipline you're in. There are, of course, some fields, some disciplines where single authored papers are very much regarded as the norm and actually expected. There's a huge demand for top journals. Everyone wants to publish, of course, in the top journals. This influences international rankings for our universities, so there's an importance there. And then, of course, in South Africa, and I'm not sure whether everyone is aware of the fact that this is not done in many countries, but in South Africa, we have an accredited journal system. And through the Department of Higher Education and Training, and I'm listing just some of the ISI, the IBSS, Web of Science, etc. Those are some of the lists upon which accredited journals feature. And then the Department of Higher Education and Training also has a list of accredited journals. Now, if you are a South African, because I know there are people from many other countries on the call as well, but just for those of you who are in South Africa, if you publish in an accredited journal, the institution receives funding from the Department of Higher Education and Training. So there's a financial incentive, depending on which department you're in, which environment you're in, that some of that money may trickle down to you or not. something you have to talk to your supervisor or your line manager about and find out, where do I stand? Because often that can be a source of leverage for you then to publish in an open access journal and to use those funds to cover the publishing costs. Of course, there's this huge issue around predatory journals. This was quite a thing about 10 years ago. And our colleagues at CREST, Professor Johan Mouton and some of his colleagues wrote an excellent paper on this. If you're worried about predatory journals, go and read about it. Joining the academic conversation is not only about reading in your field. It also means that you need to read about academic publishing. Read about things like predatory journals. Read about how to write well, how to produce work that is concise and clear. So you have to join the conversation in its fullest if you really want to be successful. And then, of course, there are things like publication units. How does this whole subsidy system work? People are interested. There's lots of information on our own university's website, I'm sure at many others, but you can also drop me an email if this is something that worries you. It's not relevant for people in other countries, so I'll move on from that. But of course, impact factors and altmetrics are things that you need to know and understand as you enter the space. You cannot simply get on a bicycle and go and ride the Cape Town cycle tour. You need to, first of all, buy a bicycle. You need to have the right shoes, the right clothes, and you need to train. So you need to be sure that you're familiar with these things that sit around successful publishing. And of course, a huge consideration now in academic publishing is AI. And we'll pick up on that again a little later. So these are just some examples of the sorts of things that you need to start looking at when you enter the publication space. Here on the right-hand side of the screen, I've actually captured the information of Professor Dan Stein, who some of you may have heard of. Professor Stein was probably one of South Africa's top researchers, if not the top researcher. And this is taken from his Google Scholar profile. He passed away a couple of months ago, but a wonderful researcher. And for those of you who are saying, oh my word, I'll never get there, many of us will never get there. So just to say, what you're seeing here is what you should know about yourself and your own publication. His work was cited by others over 38,000 times. He had an H index, which is a factor that is calculated of number of citations relevant to relative to number of publications, and a very high H index. Different sites have different indices. This, as I said, is from Google Scholar, but you can also look at Scopus, you can also look at Web of Science. And then the I-10 index relates to how many papers were cited more than a specific number of times, in this case 10 times. And you can see, if you look annually, he was being cited extensively. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is not to dishearten you and say, oh, you know, you're nowhere if that is the case. The reason I'm showing you this is to make you aware of the fact that you can glean information about your standing in the field, and you need to know where you stand in the field. Which brings me to the little screenshot on the left-hand side, where someone who actually worked a lot with Dan Stein, he was at UCT, is Professor Soraya Sidat. You can see Soraya as the first author of that first publication at the top there. This is just an example that I took. I didn't look for her top paper or anything like that. And what you immediately see is how many times that her work has been cited. But what you might not have known is that if you click there, you can actually see what years this work was cited and who cited this work. And then you can have a look at who is using your work and what conversations are you joining. And if people are not yet using your work, or if you haven't started publishing yet, it's good to go and have a look at the people who you are citing in your research at the moment to see who else is in that field, who else is part of that conversation. Because those are the papers, though, that is the research you would want to draw on to strengthen your own work. So really just to encourage you to make use of what is available for us out there. And then, as I said, each field, each discipline has its own foci, its own journals, and its own debates. And if you want to be successful with publishing, you have to join a debate that is current. Now, I know that some of you are thinking, Susan, but my work is novel, and I want to make a novel stand in the field. Well, yes, that's fabulous if your work is novel, but you're going to have to work really, really hard if you are entering the field cold, so to speak. It's a tough entry. It's like breaking through the icebergs up there in the North Pole area. It's really the toughest route around the world, if you understand my metaphor. So generally speaking, especially if you're entering into publication, especially if you are wanting to publish before your PhD, then it will probably be much easier for you to see what are the current debates and consider how you can speak into those debates. So, of course, in order to do that, you need to know which are the leading journals in your field. And if you think back to the previous slide, already some hints, if you start looking on websites like Google Scholar, who is publishing on what, you could start seeing which journals are leading with these debates, which journals are leading with these conversations. So Luther, maybe at this point, we can just take a bit of a breath. Any comments or questions coming through for where we've got to so far? Because then we're going to just start focusing on what does this mean for your doctoral research.
Okay, so we have received quite a number of questions. I don't know if you want to touch on them right now or later on during the Q&A session, because they're quite spread out.
They're quite spread out, okay.
Yes.
No sort of general comments there. Anyone rolling their eyes?
Not yet.
Not yet.
They seem to be taking it in well.
Okay. All right, so let's move to you and ask the question. So what does all of this mean for you and for your doctoral research? And so in the last part of my talk, we're just going to really try and get really practical and talk about planning, talk about timing, and talk about how we find something worth saying. So picking up on what many of you said earlier about planning, it's really important that you don't leave things to chance. And that statement will differ in relevance based on the nature of your PhD. So of course, if you're doing the PhD by publication, as I mentioned earlier, you will have a clear schedule. But for those of you who are planning to go the monograph route, the old-fashioned format, it's not old-fashioned at all, but the thesis, the full thesis, the 6, 7, or 8 chapters, don't leave things to chance. as far as publication is concerned. So as you are planning your doctoral studies, have it in the back of your head all the time. What is going to open a publication door? What would be important? What would speak into the conversation? Where is there an area that I think could have relevance? But you have to be planning, you have to be intentional with these things. And with publication generally, it's really important to have short-term goals, medium-term goals, and long-term goals. Now, if we work back from the long term, I mentor a lot of young academics at the moment. It's sort of a job they give people who've retired. And I greatly enjoy doing that mentoring work. And one of the most common things amongst my mentees is that they want to get promoted. Logically, they want to grow their careers. They want to develop their careers. If you are currently a senior lecturer and your ideal is to become an associate professor, that needs to be a long-term goal from which you're going to work back. And you need to first go and engage with the criteria for promotion, obviously. And one of those criteria is always going to be related to your research. So we could, in another webinar, talk about career building generally, but our focus today is on publication. So let's just take out that strand. If in 3 years' time, or in 5 years' time, or when you finish the PhD, you see lots of ors, it depends on your situation, but let's say that in 5 years' time, you want to be an associate professor, and that in your faculty, in your environment, in your field, people typically would be expected at associate professor level to have a research profile that looks like X. And I can't tell you what X is for your field. I can tell you in my field what people would typically probably stand a good chance with. And of course, there are other things dotted around, postgraduate supervision, and et cetera, et cetera. But you need to know what that is now because you have to work back from that. You see, going from an idea to publication very seldom takes less than 2 years, unless you are doing a review type study or what would we call it, a sort of a reflections piece or a commentary. Obviously, papers that don't require any empirical work, you're obviously looking at a shorter time frame. But if we're looking at doctoral research, then typically, do you have ethics? Have you completed your empirical work? Have you analyzed your data, etc., etc.? And if you want to have work back from the associate professor, you cannot simply be thinking of one thing. You obviously have to have a whole lot of dominoes that are going to fall into place over the next couple of years. Now, before everyone switches off their computers and head for the hills, think about it in a practical way. If I start tomorrow, I'm at the start of my PhD, I start tomorrow, and I think, what am I going to get going now? Move forward with that, get it in the oven. The moment it goes in the oven, I need to be starting with the next thing. And when I say put it in the oven, I mean send it for peer review. Because between sending something for peer review and actually publishing are many, many months. And during those months, you need to be preparing ethics for the next paper. Or if you're really busy with your PhD, thinking about the next paper. Gathering the data so that by the time you hear back from the journal, you have something else that is ready to go into the oven. And if you break your year up just into 2. Keep it simple, just into 2. Then within 2 years, you have 4 papers that are at some or other stage of progression. And it's a cumulative process, obviously, because the more you get into the system, the more things move forward. So I know that sounds very mechanical, and I know that there are many, many hindrances and barriers along the way. But if you don't have a plan, you're going nowhere. Because if you leave things to chance, publication will not happen by itself. It's hard work. Research is hard work. Writing is hard work. If we leave it to chance, it will not happen. Also, with your planning, you need to think about who you're going to take with you. And obviously, the joy of doctoral studies is that you have a supervisor, maybe 2, maybe even 3. Where do they stand in terms of your research? Have you had this conversation with them? Some students will say, I don't want to publish while I'm busy with my PhD. I cannot be working on so many things at the same time. And that's fine. That's okay. Do it when you're done. But have those conversations and think who you're going to take with you. And then, even more important, decide what story to tell as part of that planning. Because as you can see on the screen now, your research project, your doctoral study, is this huge, beautiful teal green, teal blue, I don't know, oval shape that you see there. You cannot publish a single paper on your entire paper. Well, maybe I mustn't say cannot, but it is really, really, really difficult to publish an entire paper, a single paper on your entire project. What you need to do is you need to go and pull out what is of interest for a single paper. You have to have a single story. You have to have a clear storyline, a clear focus in your paper. I have worked through the years on the editorial boards for a number of different journals. And currently I have quite senior roles on 2 very large and high impact factor journals. And I, for one, I do the initial triage. So papers that come in come to me and can be desk rejected right there. And it is heartbreaking to read a paper that clearly has come from doctoral work, where the person has tried to tell their entire PhD of 300,000 words in a 5,000 word paper. So take out what will really make this paper interesting and leave the rest for another paper. Importantly, it must surpass local interest. Now, by that, I don't mean, or maybe let me put it appreciatively, a lot of our doctoral work, depending again on your field, might be very, very specific to a local context. Okay, and that's absolutely fine. But somewhere in your study, you probably towards the end, you're going to start telling your examiners why this study has relevance beyond the local. Now, when you're writing for publication, you need to start there. In educational research, which is my field, higher education, we will often look. Our classrooms will be our laboratories, the incubators, the place where our research will take place. But someone living in Brazil or living in Indonesia or living in India will not be interested in something that is very specifically local. And now I'm trying to, of course, think of something. Nothing comes to mind immediately, but something that is absolutely pertinent to South Africa and South Africa alone, or absolutely pertinent to the teaching of anatomy in a rural area, or you get where I'm going here. If your work is such that people who live in those other countries will not be able to relate to it, don't waste your time and energy sending it to a journal sending it to an international journal. The editors will not accept it, because remember what I said earlier? They're in the business of getting people to read what they publish. And they know that the broader field will not be interested in this. So that's okay. You can publish that work in a local journal, and there are a lot of good journals in South Africa or in Africa, or whatever the case may be. But if you want to get it out into that broader field, you need to think about what about your research surpasses local interest. How does it contribute to the field? How does it add to our understanding? And of course, depending which discipline you're in, but in most cases, if your story is well-based and well-grounded in theory and the literature, people will give it more attention. So watch out for writing a paper that has the opening line. At Stellenbosch University in the faculty of whatever, we embarked on that. You're going to struggle with that. Which brings me to finding the right journal, which takes me back to that slide that I showed you earlier, where you get all those metrics and those sources of information about who is currently leading the debates. Who are you citing in your own work? Which journals did they publish in? What are those journals looking for? You've got to ask yourself all these questions, and the earlier you ask those questions, long before you put the bread in the oven, the better. And then linked to this, and this is also part of the planning, thoughts on the format and type of the paper. Is it going to be a research paper? Are you going to take the core of what came out of your study, a core issue, the main thing, and write a research paper on that? Are you going to do a knowledge synthesis or a review? Maybe your literature chapter lends itself to that. You really interrogated an aspect of the literature that is less known or less familiar. Are you going to write a commentary or perspective? In other words, now that your PhD is finished, how do you take a stand relative to what has come out of your study? And I could carry on. There are lots of journals that have 12 tips, even short reports. Maybe there's an early part of your study that lends itself to something like that. So don't limit your thinking. Really engage around what is available and what is out there. And then, of course, we come to the timing, and I've sort of mentioned this already. But think about your needs and what will serve your PhD best. I've had some students who've published during their PhDs, but because of the fact that most students doing a PhD in higher or health professions education will do a monograph, it's less likely that they will publish during the PhD. They might do it beforehand with some sort of review paper. Often when people come to me and they say, Susan, I want to do a PhD. I've sort of been thinking about, I've got some ideas around. I will often encourage that person and say, why don't you go and do a review? Why don't you do a systematic review or a scoping review on that topic and see what's out there? And many of them have taken me up on that. They come back 6 months later, 9 months later. Now I've got my doctoral question, my PhD question. I've got a much clearer sense of what the conversation looks like. But colleagues, just in terms of after the PhD, a couple of years ago, I did some research with Sue McKenna and with Professor Johan Mouton from CREST, and we looked across looked at PhD graduates across South Africa, and we compared it with the Department of Higher Education and Training's publication lists. And we were very concerned that, fortunately, just less than 50% of people who had got their PhDs in the period that we looked at had in fact never published on their doctoral studies. And obviously there were time lapses involved, but we went quite far back. I can't remember now exactly how many years, but it was like in the region of 20 years back. So don't do that to yourself, because if it ain't published, colleagues, it didn't happen. If it's not out there for peer review, it's just a book on a shelf. Which brings me to my last few thoughts, and then we're going to get into the Q&A. I think we've got about 3 minutes left. Having something worth saying is what I've really been arguing the whole time. You will get published if your argument is strong, if your topic is relevant, and if the clarity of your story is right out there. So there's a clear focus. If you have a clear story, those are non-negotiable for getting published. So you have to tease out of your doctoral studies. What was the most important argument? What about your studies, maybe now that you've finished, do you believe are most relevant? And how do I make it clear? Because in academic courses, and you see here, we're sort of closing back the full circle from where we started. Having an opinion, having worth saying, well, where does it come from? Chrissy Bowie, who's now an emeritus professor here at Stellenbosch University, but who was Deputy Vice Chancellor at Rhodes for many years, wrote a wonderful paper in 2005, so 20 years ago, and was saying that to have an opinion is constructed out of scholarship, which involves examining the work of authorities and building a case that is meaningful out of their work, the work of the authorities, and one's own research. In other words, what you have done in your doctoral studies. And so you need to build something. Many of us make the mistake, I made that mistake when I finished my PhD, that I was just going to cut and paste paragraphs from my doctoral research and plonk it all together, and surely that would make a paper. Well, no. Unfortunately, you have to go back and ask yourself the questions of argument and of relevance and of the currency of your research. Essentially, that story worth telling is about the so what angle. What does this mean? How does this have value? Why is it important? So often, by the time we come to an end of our PhDs, we've been working on it for so long that we've forgotten what lit that candle right at the start. You've got to go back to that, because that's the so what. That's what the editor will be looking for when she or he looks at your research or looks at your submission. And then just finally, and then we're going to go to questions, just a reminder that cycle that I was talking about, having something brewing, having something stewing, having something with ethics, having something where you're in data collection phase, having something that's being finalized, having something under review. All of the time that will contribute to your learning. You don't learn, you don't research and then write the research. You research as you write, you learn as you write. The writing is the learning. And the most important thing, if you forget everything I said today, take this with you. Writing is a practice. It is something that can be acquired and developed. If you feel that you're not a good writer at the moment, you're just at the start of a journey that can take you all the way through to the Comrades Marathon. You can acquire it. It can be developed. It's not inherent. Sure, some people are a little bit more talented than others, but it is not a skill that's inherent in and of itself. It needs to be practiced. Even the best and most successful authors will tell you they need to practice. And my closing comment, it's not like riding a bike. It's not something you can leave for 20 years. You learned to ride a bike as a child, and now you're 40 and your significant other says, let's go on a cycling trip. You jump on the bicycle, and after a few wobbles, off you go. It's not like that. If you don't write for those 20 years in between, you're not going to just have a few wobbles. It's going to be a long, hard slog. So keep writing. And I'm going to stop there, Luther, and we can have some conversations and take some questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor, for that. I see a lot of clapping hands. Okay, so to start off, I'm going to start with the question from Wasima, who asks, how much new knowledge do we need to create as PhD candidates?
Wasima, I don't know what field you're in. Because one of our challenges, of course, is, well, what really counts as new knowledge? Is it really, really something that no one else has ever thought? And it's a conversation I have a lot with my PhD students. It depends on your field, but let me say, in my field, the way in which we would argue that something is original, is sufficiently original and new, is if it works with theories that it slightly extends, that it uses in a slightly different way. If it generates data in an area in which data has not previously been collected. And there we can get very, very specific. If you're working, and I mean, if we look at technology and the affordances that technology brings, using new technology could make it sufficiently new and novel. Using an existing method or methodology, but just shifting it slightly could again give you sufficiently new and novel. But that is a really good conversation to have with your supervisor, because your supervisor will know the field. And read other PhDs. Don't read the whole thing, no. But go and find on Sun Scholar or your own institution, all the PhDs are available there. Go and scan their intros. Go and quickly have a look at the methodology. See how they positioned their work. Go and read the discussion. Read the last part and see the ways in which people have offered an argument to make a claim about what they've done. I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Prof. Then we have another question here from Selena, who asks, how will I be sure that this is a really good or leading journal?
Yeah, so I mean, people can, we can look at rankings. There's lots of debate around rankings, but I think at the moment, Nature and Science pretty much Lancet. If you go, and this is freely available on the internet, you can actually go and ask what are the 5 leading journals in the field of microbiology. And you will be able to see, based on impact factors in most cases. An impact factor is a measure of how likely you are to get cited if you publish in that journal. But I don't think there's much debate. If you publish in Nature and you publish in Science and you publish in Lancet and you publish in the New England Journal of Medicine, those are up there. But many of us will never get in there. So it's about getting a sense of what are sort of the journals in your field that are often used and therefore have good impact factors. That is one way of looking. Another way is, of course, to have a look, go to the journal's website and go and see who's the editor-in-chief, who's on the editorial board. Where does this journal come from? Is it linked to a strong institution? The moment you get a journal that says, publish with us, quick turnaround on peer review, 10 weeks to public or 10 days to publication, I would run away from that journal. So the good journals are journals that have solid peer review processes, and have strong editorial boards and again, go and see who you're citing and ask your supervisor. But important that you know those things.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. The questions are really rolling in, actually. So we do have a couple, just letting you know. We have one from, who I'm assuming Nireli, who asks, I received an email to review an article, not to my university email, but to my personal email for a journal I wasn't sure about. Is it normal to be contacted out of the blue by a journal to edit something?
Unfortunately, yes, it's horrifying how, and the world the way it is today, they've got all our information everywhere. As important as I believe it is that we all contribute to the peer review process, for every time you submit for publication, remember that at least 3 other people will have to read your paper, and that's not including the editor-in-chief. So you should, for every paper that you submit, you should accept at least 3 requests to review. That's my argument. However, I wouldn't get involved with journals that seem to be very dodgy. As I said, go and see, do they have a strong editorial board? How did they get hold of you? Yeah, be careful. Don't get sucked into doing work for something that is predatory.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next one, we've got a question from Fatima. So your PhD thesis has a research question. Now you must publish an article. So do you draft a different question? How do you go about this?
Yeah, that is a very, very good question. So if you're going to, if you're going to work with your research question, you're obviously talking about wanting to write a research paper. If you had a single research question, because of course a lot of people will have a research question and then some sub-questions sometimes, but if you're working with a single research question, you need to explain to the reader why you're looking at this research question in a very particular way. I wouldn't change my research question, but I would explain why this paper is focusing on this aspect of the research question. And then a next paper will focus on a different aspect of the research question. But, and there's a big but, here disciplinary norms and values do differ. There are some fields that would say that what I've just said is not appropriate. And it's one research question and one paper, and then that's it. And then you must look at write a commentary, offer 12 tips, etc., etc. So again, know your field. But definitely in my field, I have a PhD student who graduated about 1.5 years ago, and she is currently working on her 3rd paper from the same research question. But from the start, she itemized or identified 3 very clear argument strands.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question from Glenn, who starts off by saying, thanks for the presentation, Prof. My question is as follows. If I've just finished my thesis and the supervisors are unable to partner with me in producing papers, can I, as a student, publish the work without them? Can you also touch on university ethics in this case?
Yeah, again, so it's a conversation that you actually have to have with your supervisors. So typically, there's sort of like traditionally, after the PhD, the student and the supervisors would have at least one publication. But sometimes the student takes that work further very rapidly. In fact, this student that I've just referred to is busy with her 3rd paper. The second one, the co-supervisor and I are actually not authors on the paper. We said to her, you go ahead, because at that stage, both of us were, for different reasons, unable to engage with that paper. So she's acknowledged us in her acknowledgements, but we're not co-authors. In fact, we encouraged her to go and draw on 1 or 2 colleagues. They brought in additional data, which is, of course, something else that can happen. You build on your PhD and you do further research. I don't, to the best of my knowledge, and here maybe the postgraduate research office would be better place to check. To the best of my knowledge, though, there are no rules regarding how that works. To me, the ethical thing to do is to support my PhD students to publish as much as I possibly can. And they are obviously always the first author in that context. I know that sometimes it gets messy, and I'm assuming that there could be instances where, the relationship is such that the supervisors are not assisting, and I'm not sure why that would be, but it could happen. In which case, I would be very businesslike about something like that, and I would formally put an email to my supervisors to say, this is my intention, this is what I will be doing. Please confirm whether you would like to be involved or not, and if not, are you happy that I continue? That we make this a business engagement. It's a pity, but it's a better way than to afterwards have to withdraw a paper because people feel that they've not been acknowledged as authors.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Moving on to the next question, we've got one from Eleanor, who says, publishing before, during, and after PhD is extremely important. However, I feel that supervisors should encourage a doctoral student to write articles. On the other hand, I have this fear of publishing conceptual papers because I do not want to put my novice contribution out there too early. So, how would one approach publishing in the initial phase of the PhD? And Eleanor goes on to say, my second question is, can I include my research journey story as a chapter in my thesis, or would you recommend rather to publish it separately in a paper?
Okay, so a couple of things happening there. I agree, and I think I tried to say that if you publish before your PhD, you need to be sure that you can put your hands on your hips sufficiently, that even before you complete your doctoral studies, you have a sense that you know and understand the field sufficiently. Otherwise, I wouldn't encourage publication before having done that significant body of work. But with a caveat, as I mentioned, there are things like scoping reviews and realist reviews where actually doing that work and publishing on it not only gives you publication, but actually is a fabulous entry into your doctoral studies. So you've got to weigh up timelines and what works for you. I would be very hesitant on writing a commentary in a field that I haven't established myself in. I think journals will also struggle to accept something from a commentary from someone who has never published. But there are no hard and fast rules because, of course, sometimes undergraduate students will write commentaries based on their experiences in the classroom, for example. And there are some journals that would publish something like that. So, yeah. Yeah, I think you need to be careful. As far as the chapter on the personal experience is concerned, again, this differs significantly from one discipline to the other. And go and see what people do in your field and whether that sort of approach is acceptable. I can tell you that definitely in the humanities and many of the social sciences, definitely in my field, I've often had students who, I don't think I've ever had anyone who's written a chapter, but who've written, sort of provided, in my own PhD, which was written all those years ago, I had a section at the end of every chapter. My research focus was academic literacy, and at the end of every chapter, I reflected on my own academic literacy development as a doctoral student in doing the work in that chapter. So it is acceptable in certain contexts and certain fields. But there are no hard and fast rules. I'm currently examining a PhD from the UK, which is completely out of the box, but it's still a PhD. It's still answering a research question. So yeah, lots of options.
Okay, thank you for that, Prof. Another question here from Divya, who asks, how do you deal with numerous rejections and revisions before a manuscript gets accepted?
With difficulty. I don't, with lots of pieces of cake and lots of milkshakes from steers. Those were the ways in which I dealt with rejection. We all get rejected, and it's hard, and especially because we've put so much energy into that work. But it is part of the process. The most important thing when you get your first rejection, if you get a desk rejection, it's really problematic because you don't get any feedback. And that's where you got to go and find a critical friend and say, won't you read this and tell me honestly, does it make sense? Where am I missing the plot? Etc., etc. Because you've got to ask someone who knows your field so that they will be able to see the gaps. But if you get feedback and then get rejected, at least you can look at what the reviewers have said. And the most difficult thing for us is to own the fact that actually maybe we got it wrong. I'm talking about myself now. It's really tough. Your first reaction is these people didn't read the paper. I've said that before. They didn't read the paper. How could they say that? They clearly didn't see what I wrote here on the 6th line on page 20. But you see, that's the thing. When I go back to it and I look at it carefully, I think, but my argument wasn't strong enough. My focus wasn't clear enough. And because of that, they missed that important piece of information. So it takes time, and it takes a lot of rewriting and a lot of work. But trust me, that first publication is probably one of the most exciting days of your life. And I'm sure there are many that will agree with me. I'm just going to have some water.
Okay, sure, no problem at all. Radwa, I see you want to raise your hand. I'm just going to read the next question, and perhaps you can raise your hand and I'll be able to unmute you. And please just try to keep your question short and concise, given the time that we have left. So, Professor, the next question is from Becca, who asks, regarding publications, some of us are self-funded. Can the university help with publication fees as it can get very steep?
Yeah, so I've sort of been out of the direct university system now for a little bit more than a year. But up until the time that I was within the university system, I was aware of the fact that there was an open source fund. It didn't last the whole year, so important to get your application in early on. But that's at Stellenbosch University. So I'm not sure if you said whether you're at Stellenbosch or not. And then I also know that there are some faculties that have now also made funds available for publishing in accredited open access journals. So the accredited is the important thing, because they know that they will get some money back from that publication at some point. And then, of course, it's so important that early on you choose your journal. That's why I put it in the planning section of our discussion today, because you need to plan for where that money is going to come from. Otherwise, you need to be positioning your work and telling your story in a different way for a different audience. There are still many journals that charge very low, very minimal amounts of money. They're getting fewer all the time, but there are still some. So it's about you doing a bit of work and looking around that. And of course, your supervisors might have funds available. Don't be shy to ask. They are also getting a publication in the process. So they might be able to assist. But it's a tough one.
Okay, thank you for that clarity, Prof. Radwa, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your session and giving me the opportunity to ask. I am a PhD. It's my final stage to submit my thesis, and I am a bit not confident. How can I say that my work is making a contribution? Because how can I define contribution to be for a PhD thesis to get accepted and defended in front of my panel? Especially if my professor is a bit busy and my topic, maybe he may not help me a lot. So how can I define contribution? Thank you so much.
Radwa, can I ask you what field you're in?
International economics.
Internationally. Oh, wow. Okay. So, Radwa, how are you going to define your contribution? We're going to go back to what I said on one of the slides. How do you have an opinion? How do you know you've got something worth saying? You need to believe in the work that you've done and take what you've learned from your research and put it, almost mirror it against what is currently there in the field, and show where your research has touched on what we know and where there have been instances where your research has broken through what was already out there. And I know it sounds like a daunting thing, but you know what? As you come to the end of your PhD, you know more about that topic than anyone else, probably in the world at that particular point in time. Your specific research question is the area in which you are the expert. So don't be intimidated. If you've done solid research, and I'm sure you have, then you must take a stand for your research and be bold. I can share with you very quickly that right at the end of my PhD, my one supervisor was not in agreement with what I'd done. And I was not a young woman when I did my PhD. And my other supervisor was happy, but the one supervisor felt that I had chosen the wrong approach. And I remember getting that information. It's way before we got everything on it. I had to come into the faculty to come and fetch her written comments and everything. And I remember driving home and I cried all the way home. And when I got home, I said to myself, this is ridiculous. You know what you did in this research. Put your hands on your hips and go and look why you did what you did. And I went back and I made some notes about why I had done what I'd done. I went back to the faculty the next day, had a meeting with the supervisors, and I said, I beg to differ, and this is how we're doing it. And this is why. And the irony is that in my oral, the one examiner commented and said, you did this in a very unusual way. Can you explain why you did it that way? And I hauled out my little piece of paper that I'd written that day. And I said, this is why I did it. But only you can take that step, right? Only you can take control of your work. But remember, you're the expert now.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Professor. Looking at the time, we do have, quite a number of more questions to ask, but unfortunately, we're constrained by time. So I would just like to conclude the Q&A by asking, one specific question. So in practical terms, what separates a paper that is technically correct from one that you would say truly has something worth saying? What should candidates look for in their own work?
Something that makes you think. It's not just describing a piece of research. There's something in the writing that suggests that the reader will have to grapple with, that the reader will have to engage with. It's not just a description of this is my study and this is what I found and this is even why it's important. It's about looking around the corner of the research to see what sits behind it. What makes us, what says that more work is needed. That is often a very good sign. That when you finish reading it, you think, this is fantastic. We must do more work like this. Those are the sorts of papers, definitely in my field, that typically get taken forward.
Okay, powerful. Thank you very much, Prof. And just to point out, we do have a lot of comments saying thank you very much for the insightful comments. You'll be able to have a look at all of those, but quite a lot more questions that still yet to be addressed. It's
Luther,
almost
can I say that if some of the attendees have got questions that really challenge them and worry them, they're welcome to drop me an email. I'm not going to respond to them today, but over the next couple of days, if I can, I will. I'm happy
okay.
to do that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Prof. With that being said, thank you. Natalie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Luther. Again, from our side, from the African Doctoral Academy, we'd like to say a very big thank you to you, Professor Skolkvik. It's been an absolute pleasure having you as always, and I do know that the delegates that have joined us online have also found your information session very informative. So a very big thank you for doing the masterclass. Also, thank you to also all the delegates that have joined. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and we will be making this recording available on our YouTube channel, which has been posted, and we hope to have you join us for future masterclasses and courses in the future. So again, very big thank you, Prof. Appreciate it a lot, and also very big thank you to Luther for all the questions. Fantastic.
And good luck.
Definitely. Thanks, everyone.